Hi, and welcome to the ONF Spotlight on 5G Connected Edge Cloud for Industry 4.0 transformation. I'm Timon Sloan with the Open Networking Foundation, and today it's my great pleasure to welcome Chris DePuy. Chris is the technology analyst and co-founder of the 650 Group. Chris has started following ONF activity about a year and a half ago. That's when we got to first meet and know each other a bit. And he's been analyzing the market size for ONF's projects and the impact that ONF's open source work is having on the markets. And I always find discussions with Chris interesting. He always has interesting insights. So I'm really looking forward to today's presentation. So with that, Chris, please take it away.
Well, thanks, Timon. I appreciate you inviting me to the conference here. And without further ado, I will do a screen share and get this presentation started. Okay. So I will be talking about the private cellular opportunity. This comes with many names. Many call it, enterprise LTE or CBRS or things of that nature. But I just figured I'd capture that it is both CBRS as well as unlicensed and licensed spectrum outside the U.S. as well. Okay, so here we go. What I was planning to do here is talk about the transition from consumer licensed towards the private cellular opportunity. And just to put in context, what's happening here, we've seen many generations of cellular technology enter the marketplace. So we had 3G, which is when basically the smartphone era, that's when that all began. And in the 4G era, LTE era, we saw Uber and Lyft and Grubhub and many other, very exciting uses of the mobile platform that is cellular. Now, we are in the early stages of the 5G era, and basically this era of communications will see a merge of communications and computing where both 5G cellular and what's being called Industry 4.0 come together. And I think this is pretty interesting because if you think about it, that really was not the case, that there was a merge between cellular and computing in the past. Now, I wanted to also talk here about what we're seeing as we head into the 5G enterprise market. What we're seeing is that there's new spectrum that is being made available into the enterprise market, and that is not only creating the market, but is also creating new avenues to that same market. In other words, new distribution channels and new players are now able to compete for the enterprise market. The next thing that is changing in the 5G and enterprise era, that there are new uses for wireless systems, and this is generating new devices as well as services. So new use cases is really the point here. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing new distribution channels open and new business models be created to allow enterprises and other organizations that are private to take advantage of cellular. And this, of course, demands new technology and business models. And I'll touch on each of those as we head into the rest of the slideshow. Okay, so let's talk about new spectrum. So it's very clear these days that CBRS, or the 3.5 gigahertz spectrum in the US, has been a very popular and successful auction that occurred in the US. And it is brand new, and it's basically allowing the creation of the enterprise cellular market in the US as well. The new spectrum as well is being created in the 6 gigahertz area. Initially, this is being created primarily for the Wi-Fi market. You can take a look at what countries have adopted it. It's the US, several Latin American nations, the UK, and several Asian countries. I expect that 6 gigahertz will become popular in nearly every country around the world, and again, mainly for Wi-Fi, but I don't rule out and actually think that cellular will take advantage of this new spectrum, of which there's a lot. And then in several other nations, the UK and Germany come to mind, there's private mid-band that is being created, and basically this is allowing the private LTE market to take hold in these European nations. And I do expect that there are going to be a lot of comparisons made for, let's say, private LTE or private mid-band and CBRS, because there are a lot of similarities in that. each of the license holders will have, the right to use the spectrum, mainly within the walls or of their buildings or on their campuses. So there are many similarities. But the point of it is these are all brand new, and it's creating a lot of opportunity for cellular as well as new areas for Wi-Fi to enter the campus or enterprise market. And of course, we've had some recent new spectrum open up. 60 gigahertz comes to mind. It is in many ways similar to millimeter wave that the 5G mobile operators are using. And then I do think that there will be an increasing use of cellular technology on top of the existing unlicensed spectrums. 5 gig and 2.4 gig come to mind immediately, and 900 gigahertz perhaps. There aren't too many efforts underway there, but it's got great propagation characteristics, so there's a good reason to use that. So imagine all these bands either can or will be used for cellular, and this is all new. So that's one of the reasons why I'm pretty excited about what's happening in the private cellular market, or enterprise LTE, enterprise 5G market. Now, in order to take advantage of this new spectrum, what we expect to happen is that new channels of distribution will be created, or new players will emerge that take advantage of the opportunity for enterprises to build out cellular networks. So working from left to right on this chart, what you can see is that in the past, the main place where cellular worked was on licensed spectrum. And the spectrum holders were the mobile network operators, and therefore they controlled where the cellular systems would be deployed and under what conditions, because it was their spectrum. They paid billions for it in most cases, and had the say in how it would get deployed. What this means is that for enterprise systems that were deployed, they had to be built with the permission of mobile operators. And historically, we've known this market as the DAS market, distributed antenna system. You can see these things in work at, like, sports stadiums or shopping malls or transportation facilities like subways, where they do in fact have cellular coverage, and they may be owned privately. But the fact of the matter is they had to work within the confines and the requirements of the mobile operators. Well, that's changing now because of all this new spectrum. That's what I mean by new avenues to market. So what's happening is mobile operators will certainly play in the enterprise market, but also it's our expectation that we'll see value-added resellers, systems integrators, managed service providers, the vendors that make the equipment themselves, the hyperscalers, in other words, companies like Amazon and Microsoft and others, as well as manufacturers. When I think about manufacturers here, I'm talking about, like, machine makers or robot companies, or industrial equipment industrial equipment companies who integrate the technology of cellular technology right into their equipment. So what that means is private cellular systems might be, in fact, installed by many different parties. And I think this is really fundamental, because it is a big change from, let's say, the 4G era into what we all now know as the 5G era. And it's all been enabled because of all this new spectrum that I was talking about earlier. Now, one of the things that's happening is as we see private cellular work its way into the enterprise, it's our expectation that it will look increasingly like IT equipment that we are already seeing widely deployed these days. So what I mean by that is today you can buy campus switches or enterprise switches and enterprise class wireless LAN, security systems and such from the same systems integrators or value-added resellers I was talking about earlier. It's a very big, thriving market, and is experiencing, we expect will experience growth over the next couple of years, especially wireless LAN. And it's our view that these channels that sell to large enterprises, which is what I'm showing on the left of this chart, will begin to adopt the business practices to sell cellular technology to enterprises. So I just to briefly explain what I'm showing in this chart, on the left, you can see large enterprises are very likely to want a bundle of technology that includes switching, wireless, enhanced network access control, unlicensed cellular, as I'm talking about here, as well as in the future, IoT support and firewall or security capabilities. On the right, I don't expect cellular installations in smaller businesses, so that's why we're differentiating between large and small, left and right on the chart. But the point of it is we expect that we'll see IT purchasing of cellular technology in the future. This is important because what's happening in the IT space now, or networking space especially, is that increasingly customers want to manage their systems on a single management platform. That's what we're referring to when we say single pane of glass. And the idea behind this is that increasingly the same vendor or set of vendors who agree to have their systems managed on single pane of glass will in fact be working together, or will have to see acquisitions or corporate actions of one type or another that create the stack on the left side of this chart. I think this is important, and it's going to play out over the course of years. Nonetheless, cellular for many verticals will look just like an IT purchase. Now, one of the things that you hear about the Wi-Fi market is that it has a lot more compatibility with devices in the wild or in the IT place, and that is exactly the case. Wi-Fi has a distinct advantage over cellular in that many of the devices that have found their way into an enterprise are Wi-Fi compatible. We all know it and experience it at home and in business and such. But as we see, for instance, in the US market, CBRS spectrum get incorporated into devices, we're very likely to see that these devices that are cellular in nature become quite ubiquitous and capable of connecting to cellular systems intended for enterprises. So there'll be a bit of catch up here where Wi-Fi will always have the advantage, but enterprise cellular devices, IoT devices, communications devices, smartphones, things of that nature, will be catching up, and the divide between Wi-Fi and cellular will close. I don't think it's going to close completely. That's why I leave a little bit of mark between the orange and the blue here. But the point is that the cellular market's playing catch up. And this is important because it will drive growth for enterprise cellular. Now, let's talk about channels of distribution, or ways to sell private cellular or enterprise cellular. I've just listed what appears to be kind of a mishmash of different names and categories on this chart, but the point of it is that there are many different channels that are currently embracing the sale of cellular technology to enterprises. These include the hyperscalers, for instance, Amazon and Azure. Microsoft Azure have storefronts that allow customers to buy CBRS networks. And of course, Microsoft Azure has acquired some telco core companies in this calendar year in 2020, which make their offerings more complete. Of course, there is a need, especially for CBRS, for service providers known as the SaaS providers. So Federated Wireless, Google, CommScope, and a handful of others are participating in this market. What this means is that there is going to be a need, either directly or indirectly, for working with service providers like SaaS players. And then, of course, there are managed service providers. Some examples, of course, I mentioned Federated already, but Federated is one such example. Geoverse, who's part of a publicly traded company called AT&I, is another example, and there are many other managed service providers in the marketplace. Of course, the mobile operators will participate, and then we expect to see nonprofit organizations and associations play their part in this marketplace as the enterprise cellular market takes off. I'd be remiss if I did not mention that the vendors who are participating in the enterprise cellular market don't have their own offerings and develop their own channels. In other words, some of the main vendors here are selling direct and offering services that are associated with their products, and others are offering, their products through some of the channels that I mentioned earlier, like systems integrators and VARs. So there's a lot of opportunity here for players to sell their technology, their cellular technology, into enterprises that are different from what we saw in the 4G era. This is very, very fundamental and important. You can see that there's been quite a lot of effort placed here to enable the market to begin and grow. So what I would like to now do is talk about customer targets or verticals. So one of the advantages of enterprise cellular, just cellular technology in general, is that it has this capability to manage mobile connections. In other words, there's a mobility component to cellular which just does not exist to the same degree for Wi-Fi. And what this allows us to say is that, well, cellular is good for systems where there's wings, wheels, or rails at work. In other words, airport, transportation facilities, logistics. And then, of course, in many, if not all cases, enterprise cellular is operating at higher output powers than Wi-Fi, and therefore is very well suited for the outdoor enterprise. Utilities, mining, exploration are very good examples of these types of systems. And then because in many cases, cellular intended for the enterprise is going to be operating in spectrum that isn't specifically not Wi-Fi capable, you can offer a different level of service that is not interrupted by Wi-Fi devices. And of course, because it's operating different spectrum that is not as common, there is another component here where security can be viewed as very important. So where I'm coming out on enterprise cellular is that it will compete with Wi-Fi, but just not that much, because a lot of these cases where enterprise cellular does so well is where Wi-Fi doesn't do that well and has not actually been terribly successful to begin with. So there is going to be some overlap, but not a whole lot. And I wanted to just share with you quite a long list here of use cases on the left where enterprise cellular is likely to do well. I have to say that each one of these use cases or customer types is currently using enterprise cellular. I've done a survey of manufacturers, service providers, channel players who have each shared with me a variety of different use cases, and this list is not totally comprehensive, but it's a pretty good list of where enterprise cellular is at work. It's a long list. And you might say, well, gee, if it's such a long list, it's got to compete with Wi-Fi. And like I said, it does to some degree. But the price points are a little different, and the compatibility with all the Wi-Fi devices isn't quite up to snuff, as I was saying earlier. So the point of it is that the cellular verticals and use cases are quite exciting here. And just to add something that you might find interesting, today, at the same time I'm making this presentation, the ONF just released a panel that I was the host for, and where I interviewed 7 different players in the enterprise cellular market. And one of the main topics we talked about was use cases and verticals. So I don't mean by any stretch that this is a comprehensive list, and if you're interested in digging in more, I would encourage you to see that presentation. I thought it was a very, very good panel, and I'm sure you'd enjoy it if this is one of your topics of interest. Okay, so that's enough on verticals. Now, wanted to share with you what our view is on how big the private cellular or enterprise cellular market can be. And I just want to share with you that we're looking at this not only from a US market perspective, but also the not US market. And it's our expectation that there will be both a product and a services element to this market size. And we peg the market at almost $2 billion out to about 5 years from now. And it'll start out as the CBRS market and leverage a lot of the technology that has been developed for the DAS industry. And we think over time this market will look increasingly like the Wi-Fi market for certain installation requirements, especially when it comes to indoor, and then a little bit more like the service provider market for more outdoor environments. And there's a lot of room here for innovation, and this is a pretty big, important market. So anyway, this is how we see the development of the CVRS and private cellular market developing over the next handful of years. And then I just wanted to also mention that the Internet of Things opportunity here is quite exciting. What you can see here is we've taken our IoT report numbers. We publish this report frequently, and what we do not only is count the Internet of Things, but we also count the connection types. So I've parsed out the connection types by non-wireless LAN, just to give you a sense for, you know, what's competing with cellular that is not wireless LAN related. Of course, you can see that on the top, a lot of these connection types are related to cellular, 4G, Cat-M, NB-IoT, and 5G are the primary examples of cellular. And it may not look like that big of a chart, but we're talking about billions of connections here that are going to be Internet of Things connections to the cellular market. It's an enormous opportunity. And when it comes down to it, a lot of these will be focused on the enterprise market. So I just wanted to share with you how excited we are about the opportunity for cellular IoT for the enterprise market. And it's important to keep in mind here that the private cellular market, you know, touches a lot of things. So I mentioned, you know, cellular equipment. That's one of these smaller circles. It's enterprise cellular will be approaching in about 5 years about $2 billion, equipment and services. But I also have to mention, in context of what I was saying about Internet of Things, we expect that the cellular component of the IoT market will approach about $13 billion 5 years from now. It's opportunity. There's a lot of billions to pursue. And so there's one other important component here to consider, which is that the computing that will sit and coexist with Internet of Things and communications services that exist within the boundaries of the enterprise that is leveraging cellular. These will include servers and the services that run on those servers. We are anticipating this market will reach in about 5 years just over $2.5 billion, $2.6 billion is our estimate. And then one other thing to bring to the conversation here is that not each of these markets, technologies rather, will be resident at the premise. What's happening at the premise is there because it needs to be. In other words, the communications equipment that allows the wireless connection must be on-prem or darn close to it. And the same thing goes with the IoT devices. By definition, they are the things that are enterprise located, so they're prem-based, as well as edge computing. There's, however, quite a trend where some of the edge computing or the management of these premises-based devices will be located in the cloud or in co-location. So there's a need, therefore, to have coordination between what's happening on the enterprise location on-prem, as well as what's happening in the cloud. As we all know, there's been a very, very important trend towards moving workloads over to the cloud and offering software as a service. And these trends are very likely to coexist as a hybrid between what's going on the premise as well as what's happening in the cloud. And I just show this big, large circle to the right that is reflective of the fact that we're very likely to see cloud services integrate into the cellular opportunity. And it's no small secret, this is one of the things that the hyperscalers are thinking about when they're entering into the CVRS market, at least in my view, that's why. Because they see a way to get more connections for enterprises with this new connectivity type, cellular, as well as get their computing capabilities that are cloud-based to provide value to enterprises. And so with that, I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss the private cellular market. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. That was really terrific, and I really appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing your thoughts and views on the market.
It's my pleasure, Tom.
So on that last slide, I'm curious. You had the bubble slide. You had 13 point something, I think, for the you called it enterprise cellular IoT. And so I didn't quite get. So are you talking about the devices, or the kind of the UE equivalents in this private cellular space?
Yeah, that's what I had in mind, Timon. As I mentioned during the presentation, we have a report where we count things, Internet of Things, and then the connection types of those things. So what we did was looked at how many of the enterprise resident IoT devices that will have cellular connections on them, and then we, assessed what the selling price that is attributable to cellular would be for these devices. And basically, it's units times ASP is 13 billion. It's a relatively simple calculation, but it gives you a sense for just how exciting the opportunity is. This is only 5 years from now. I have to say, it's a heck of an opportunity. And of course, cellular is only a part of what's going on from a dollar value standpoint for IoT in the enterprise. It's really quite an enormous market, and yeah, so this is the IoT equipment only.
Good, thanks. And so I guess that was going to be my next question. Like, so of that 13 billion, how much of that is kind of what people think of traditionally as handsets now, and how much of it is devices and machines?
Yeah, I mean, it is both actually, Timon. So initially, a lot of it will be the wirelessly connected devices that you do see in the enterprise. Mainly for communications from person to person. But if you look at our forecasts, basically the idea is that non-person connected or IoT devices take a growing share over time and eventually eclipse, these, let's just say, smartphones and tablets and such. But I have to say, the other thing to consider is that, the growth trajectory for enterprise cellular is exciting, because what we've got is these wirelessly connected devices that are, for the most part, connected to the mobile network operators' networks. In other words, licensed spectrum. And what is exciting here is that we can improve coverage or throughput of those same systems by using enterprise cellular networks, and that alone is compelling for a lot of enterprises. And on top of that, you put the really extraordinary growth opportunity of cellular-based IoT devices. It's kind of a twofold reason to consider using enterprise cellular.
Mm-hmm. Good. And I know that you look forward and forecast and think about helping us all predict the future, I guess. So on one graph you sort of had Wi-Fi, and then you had cellular devices starting to approach it. But I noticed you didn't have any time on the x-axis there.
Well, you know what they say, Timon, right? you can
easy to be right that way. But I guess I'm wondering if you would predict to some degree sort of what that timeline might look like, where they might start to approach each other.
Yeah, what I had in mind there is we've actually published this data, but I just didn't want to share every last secret we've come up with. It's in about 5 to 7 years we expect them to come as close to parity as they're ever going to get.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And so then in a similar vein, we were just talking about kind of the devices that we know today, handhelds or communication devices and IoT devices. Where does that crossover take place in your estimation?
Where person-based devices are finally exceeded by not person-based devices?
That's right, on private cellular networks.
On private cellular, it's going to be a ways off. Again, I think it's just out past our 5-year forecast. Within our 5-year forecast, that does not actually happen. If you ask me about all IoT devices, I'd say that happens, in the next year or two. because, of course, there are many other wireless systems that are actually more popular today than enterprise cellular. I mean, you have to just bear in mind that enterprise cellular is at its infancy. So, it would be very hard for it to eclipse early on for lack of coverage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, makes good sense. So I didn't notice you mentioning neutral host, and I guess I'm curious on your views on that. I mean, that's one form that it's a more traditional operator and the new private cellular kind of start to overlap perhaps a little bit more. Do you have a view on that, or what impact that might have on the market?
Yeah, I time in on the list of verticals and use cases. It was actually, I don't know, bullet point number 10 or 14 or something. It was in the middle of the list. I can see how it would get buried. Like I said, it's an eye chart with a lot of different bullets. But I do expect neutral host to be much more popular once we have this idea of shared or private spectrum, and that is because it allows the spectrum holders, which in many cases are in fact enterprises, to build their own systems. And if you think about it, if you are out bidding for CBRS spectrum, those auctions have already happened, but there will be a secondary market for that. And let's say you're an MDU, an apartment building, or a sports stadium. Why in the heck would you only use Verizon or Telefonica when you could sell to them and have all of your customers who are visiting your facility access the cellular network? So I do see these new spectrums as allowing neutral host to become popular. Now, a couple of years ago, there was in the licensed era spectrum, this era that I've kind of like called 4G era, there was also some discussion about neutral host. But what that meant was installing equipment that does lots of different licensed frequencies. And there are some examples of this. It's just kind of cumbersome and still gets caught up in negotiations with multiple service providers. So here, if you're a spectrum owner as an enterprise and you just buy CBRS or private LTE spectrum, you don't have to negotiate with the operators unless, of course, you want them to have their customers roam onto your network. And I think building it first and then negotiating is a viable strategy.
Mm-hmm. All right, good. Well, Chris, I want to thank you very much today. Really appreciate you coming and sharing your insights, your views, and some of the research in the space. We see it as well. It seems like a really exciting space, a dynamic space, and a fast-moving space. So pleased to have you here today. Thanks.
Thank you, Timon. I appreciate it. Nice talking to you.